Nevena Miletic. I work in a global regulatory policy group in Hoffman & Roche, and I'm also co-chairing Africa Regulatory Network within IFPMA. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to IFPMA event on the margins of this year's IGDRA conference. Thank you very much for joining us today to discuss these two very important topics. During the previous decade, we were witnessing tremendous changes in the area of regulatory harmonization in African continent, with the guiding principle that people in Africa should have timely access to quality medicines and vaccines that have proven efficacy and safety. One of the fundamental prerequisites that were identified was actually establishment of consistency and predictability of regulatory systems. With this idea, 8 regional economic communities have been established by transforming 55 countries through the ongoing harmonization initiatives and leading to the imminent future that looks to establishment of African Medicines Agency, so-called AMA. We believe that it is important to pause today and to reflect not only on the past, but also to look forward on what needs to be done by all the stakeholders to ensure a smooth transition to the establishment of African Medicines Agency. IFPMA and its Africa Regulatory Network welcome the development of AMA and look forward to the role it will play in fostering regulatory system strengthening and reliance across Africa. In addition, now IFPMA strongly supports the holistic vision on ongoing harmonization activities and inclusion of all regulatory aspects, not only new drug applications, but beyond that, spanning through the whole life cycle of the product and the whole life cycle management activities, as well as on the other therapeutic options like vaccines and biotherapeutics that will be reflected with the establishment of new agency. So our new first session today will bring together distinguished experts, individuals, and organizations that are working from different angles, but with the shared goal of health progress in Africa. We understand that today's topic may bring up a number of questions, and it's great to see so many people interested in the topic here today. So we hope that the panel discussion will actually facilitate the dialogue and raise awareness and provide some better understanding of what African Medicines Agency will bring and give you answers to those questions. We are also looking to the opportunity to learn more about the establishment of African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Partnership Platform and to reflect on how we can best contribute to it. With this, I would like to invite our moderator, Mr. David Mukanga, Senior Program Officer, Regulatory Affairs, Africa Systems from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to join me on the stage and open the discussion. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Nevena, and I want to first of all congratulate and thank IFPMA for putting together this session, and to thank all of you for making the time on the Sunday afternoon to be here. We're going to have a very lively and exciting discussion this afternoon, have no doubt about that. So I just want to very quickly let you know that we're going to spend, the panel is going to spend perhaps about 40 minutes, discussing this subject, and then I will allow some time at the end, maybe 15, 20 minutes, depending on how things go, for the floor to also have the opportunity to, ask questions and interact with the panel. So we have an exciting panel here of experts and people that have been involved in this process and stakeholders. So without wasting a lot of time, let me start by inviting Margaret and Domondo Sigonda from the AU NEPAD agency to come forward. Margaret chairs or heads the health unit at the NEPAD agency and has been very active in this process of driving the AMA vision forward. So welcome, Margaret.
Thank you.
Secondly, allow me to invite Gugu Mahlangu. Gugu is the Director General of the Zimbabwe Medicines Control Agency and also chairs the task team that has been charged with putting together the vision and the process of setting up AMA. So put your hands together for Gugu for me. also have the WHO has been very much involved in this process, and we're honored to have Mike Ward from the WHO in Geneva, who leads the regulatory system strengthening group there. And the WHO has been very actively involved in these discussions and this process. So Mike, you're welcome forward. I'll now invite Petra Dorr, Dr. Petra Dorr from the Swiss Medic, leads the networking team there and has been very much involved as well in the Africa Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative as a technical partner with the WHO in supporting Africa. So Petra, you're welcome. And last but certainly not least, John Mwangi from Bayer, and who also co-chairs the Africa Regulatory Network with Nevena. John, you're very much welcome.
Thank you.
So we have a full panel here, and while we are in Dublin, in Ireland, I want you to imagine these three ladies and these two gentlemen sitting somewhere in the middle of the Kilimanjaro with a bonfire in front of them and having a lively discussion about this vision of AMA. Great. So thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for being here, and we're looking forward to a lively discussion. Perhaps let's start by asking Margaret from NEPAD. What is the role, or what is going to be the role of national regulatory agencies and the number of regional economic initiatives in this process of setting up AMA and after it's been set up?
Thank you, David, and thanks everyone and IFPMA for organizing this session. Before we focus on the role of national agencies and regional economic communities, I think it's very important to reflect back as to how did we get to where we are in terms of establishing the African Medicines Agency. So the genesis basically is the African Union decision to, first of all, trying to achieve the issue of access to good quality medicines on the continent. That has been an issue for many years. And in view of that, the leadership of the African Union in 2005 decided that it's best to come up with a pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa, which should be a framework in which the continent will be able to drive the process of ensuring that African people have access to good quality medicines. And as a result of that PMPA framework, the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative was actually initiated in 2009. Nevena mentioned about it, but I think it's very important to have that perspective, because it was the national agencies and the regional economic communities themselves that determined that because of the multiple challenges that the African countries were facing in terms of ensuring that we have good quality products on the market, that we needed to see how those multiple challenges could be addressed. We all are aware that we have issues around legal framework, issues around not having human resources, or rather even financial resources to be able to regulate medical products. And so the regulators, in collaboration with partners, decided that the best way to do is to address problems one by one, and starting with harmonization of registration of medical products. And so the idea of working through regional economic communities came up. And through that process, in 2012, we were able to launch a project for East African Community that was bringing all the 5-6 member states now to come up with a framework that will assist the countries to harmonize their standards for registration and slowly be able to also build the capacity of the regulatory agencies to be able to also expand the pharmaceutical market in the region. And through that process, the idea was that from registration, then we'll slowly be moving to other regulatory functions and products. Starting with the harmonization of registration of medicines, getting countries to support each other through the regional platforms. By doing that, building trust, building capacity, and being able to facilitate joint work, and thereafter being able to facilitate access to medicines. That was the genesis of this whole process. And through this initiative, the countries and regional economic communities have worked together, and we've seen very positive outcome coming out of it. And currently, as we are speaking, the initiative has been scaled up to other regions like West Africa, Southern Africa, Central Africa, and Southeastern Africa. And of course, soon we're also planning to go to North Africa. The reason I'm giving this background is because it is through this process and through the agreement among the partners that after a registration process, then we'll be able to scale up and cover other regulatory functions and products. We are seeing a lot of progress, for example, in countries coming together and now harmonizing other areas like pharmacovigilance, clinical trial oversights, and so forth. And so through the benefit accrued from the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, in 2015, the African Union Executive Council decided that this initiative is going to be a very good foundation for establishing a single regulatory agency for Africa under the PMPA framework. A process was undertaken, which my colleague will also elaborate in terms of where we are. But basically, what the African Medicines Agency is going to do is to take on the work that is currently being undertaken under the Emirates initiative, which has been supported heavily by partners, including World Health Organization, the Gates Foundation, the World Bank, the US government, and quite a number of other partners that are supporting, including Swiss Development Agency. And so the challenge that we have currently is the sustainability of the initiative. And so the issue of establishing an African Union specialized agency that is focusing on medical products regulation was considered as a way to go. So what AMA will be doing is to basically take on the work that we're currently doing under the Emirates initiative. And we have a very clear conceptual framework as to how this will operate, because we know there are activities that are done by national agencies that can never be done by the African Medicines Agency. Issues around market control, issues around inspection of facilities and all that. That will continue to be done by the national agencies, including market authorization. But we are saying there are some aspects that countries alone cannot do them. Why? Because of sometimes limited capacity. And so we have agreed on a number of things that can be done collaboratively through the regional platform. Vigilance activities, joint dossier review, joint GMP inspections, oversight of multi-center clinical trials, for example. These are the things that we see they have potential of continuing being done through the regional platform. Why? Because you have countries that have no capacity to do such kind of things. Equally, when it comes to the African Medicines Agency, we are also seeing a potential for AMA to be able to deal with things like complex molecules, for example, providing guidance to member states on how to deal with such issues around the APIs, manufacturing and GMP inspections and so forth. So there's quite a number of things that AMA will be doing that are not necessarily going to be done by the regional economic community, or rather even the national agencies. So currently we are in a process of trying to elaborate that. And the idea is to now get to a point slowly. We have a situation where some regions, for example, they are moving into establishing their own regional agencies. But we also have a situation where some regions haven't even started the harmonization process. So AMA will really be there to be able to bridge the gap, especially where there is need of a regional agency to support technically whether it's mobilization of resources and so forth at country or regional level, depending on the need of the continent. Another aspect that I want to bring on to your attention is also that under the current Emirates initiative, through this process, and based on the decision of the African Union that Emirates should be a foundation of the African Medicines Agency, we have actually reviewed the governance framework, whereby the regulators now they provide the governance framework in such a way that you have the assembly, where the regulators of the 55 countries serve as the governing board, and we have the steering committee that is composed of the national agencies themselves, but also the regional economic communities are represented there, that are able to provide strategic direction as to how issues around regulation of medicines is governed. And of course, we also have established continental technical working groups that are responsible for providing technical guidance under the technical leadership of WHO. And so this is the structure that we're operating on. The idea is that once we have AMA fully operational, all these governance structures will now be transitioned into the African Medicines Agency. I must add, recently we also established the Emirates Partnership Platform. Basically, the idea was to also coordinate the work that partners are undertaking on the continent, because we have had a challenge where we have multiple partners doing similar activities in different countries, and sometimes coming up with different standards, creating confusion on the part of either the regulators or the various stakeholders. So we are at the process where we have agreed to establish the Emirates Partnership Platform as the Africa chapter of the Global Coalition of Interested Partners. The idea is to really streamline the support that we are getting from technical partners, financial partners, political partners, so that it's well coordinated and there's more accountability and shared impact. So I think I should stop here for now, and then we'll see how we can.
Thank you, Margaret, very much, and we really appreciate that, providing that context and background. And actually, let me just build on to the areas that you started, providing context, and move to Google. In terms of the operational model, what's the type of operational model that you're looking at for AMA, and what will be the role that different stakeholders can play in this process, very briefly?
Yes, good evening, everyone. So we, as the task team, were given the responsibility of ensuring that we can propose a model that would be viable for the continent. And the model that we proposed is based on a treaty. And the treaty has to be acceded to. And I think I will dwell on this later on. But the point is, once in the treaty itself, we'll have a model where we will have a lean structure for the organization, because we recognize that this is going to be a costly exercise, so you need to have a lean secretariat to start with. The secretariat will then run a number of what are called technical working groups. In these technical working groups, this is where the work will be done by these technical working groups, who will then either be looking at registration issues, they'll be looking at GMP issues, clinical trials issues, the various issues that currently Emirates is working on, even the harmonization efforts. So we'll have various technical working groups. We already have some in existence now, like the AVAREF, which we hope will transform into a technical working group of AMA. The idea is then to use experts who are employed in the various agencies. So none of us have the full range of technical skills that we require as regulators. But if you look at us as a continent, as a group of 55 member states, I think on the continent we have those skills. So the idea is that then you will harness those skills. You bring the experts to come and sit on the technical working groups. to then look at whatever material, whether it's a new dossier or a clinical trial that is before them, and then make a recommendation to the governing board. So the technical working groups will report to a governing board. The technical working groups with the Secretariat will also have the ability to actually make decisions, because the governing board is not going to meet regularly, but the technical working groups can meet a lot more regularly. So the stakeholders that we're looking at to support this initiative will obviously be our technical partners, our current financial and supporting partners, but more importantly, the national regulatory agencies themselves. Because the national regulatory agencies, we decided we're going to use the model that WHO PQ uses, where you actually harness the skills of the regulators that sit in the national agencies, and you use those individuals to come together and make these important contributions. So the national agencies, that will be their input in kind, I think, into the whole process. Also, we feel that that will enable our costs to be maintained, at a reasonable level.
Yeah, thanks, Gugu, for that. Do you want to very briefly also just highlight, in terms of the key milestones from now until the agency is set up, very briefly?
So you will be aware that in May, we presented the treaty to the ministers responsible for health, the African ministers responsible for health, who then adopted the treaty. The next step is that then the treaty must go to the ministers responsible for justice in the African Union. We anticipate that this will happen hopefully before the end of this year. Once the ministers of justice are satisfied with the treaty, it then goes to the heads of state, and we anticipate that it will be on their agenda for their January 2019 meeting. Hopefully by then, we are hoping that it will then be adopted. That does not mean AMA is established then. No. Because what then should happen in terms of the treaty is that we should have 15 member states acceding and signing the treaty. Once you have a minimum of 15 member states, then AMA is set up. So you can see that there's going to need to be a lot of advocacy that we do after the heads of state have signed off and agreed to the treaty, to ensure that countries do sign up. These things usually take a lot of time. We have been warned by the AU that these things can take time. So we will really have to work on this to make sure that this happens. We anticipate it might take maybe up to 2 years. For us, 3 years, Margaret says, to get 15 signatures. It takes a long time, because in some countries, the legal processes, you've got to go to parliament, you've got to do a lot of things for you to be able to sign on to a treaty, because there will be financial commitments that if you are a signatory to this treaty, you'll be expected to then provide for the functioning of AMA. So this is absolutely
ambitious timeline.
Yes. Margaret also reminded me that I should also talk about what then happens after that. once we have the 15 and have established AMA, we need to then find a hosting country that will be where AMA will be resident.
Thank you very much, Gugu, for that. And maybe at this point I come to Mike here from WHO. What has been the role of WHO in this process of this discussion that have been ongoing to set up this African Medicines Agency?
Thank you, David. And actually, we were instrumental in the original proposal. And this is something that goes back before 2014. But in 2014, we also helped develop a roadmap with milestones for setting up the AMA. And in 2016, at the regional committee meeting of AFRO, there was a resolution on regulatory system strengthening. And in fact, this was an integral part of that resolution. So we have been strong proponents. The regional director for Afro-Region has been solidly behind this, as has the WHO as an organization. It makes a lot of sense, you know, for the same reasons that it was set up within the EU to have the EMA. And I know that's going to be a future question coming up. But looking at things that can't take place right now in national authorities, or at least not well to address the challenges, and even at a regional level. So this is not meant to duplicate, but really try and build strength and capacity at a continental level. But traditionally, just recalling that the role of the WHO has been as lead technical partner. And so that would really continue. There's no difference there. And as Margaret well articulated, we're not starting from scratch. With AMRH starting in March 2012 within the East Africa community, and now spreading to ECOWAS, to West Africa, as well as SADC, IGAD in the Horn of Africa. And now with the new governance structure of AMRH, which actually has continental technical working groups within that structure, a steering committee, the partnership platform to try and organize the work of those organizations that are willing to assist technically and advocacy, etc. And then also AVREF, which is the Pan-African network for the authorization of clinical trials, which I think since 2016, the reform has been really paving the way to how the AMA would work, because here you have a Pan-African working group at the technical level, at the governance level, that would then become a technical working group under AMRH, and that in turn becomes the substance operationally and from, I would say, a governance perspective, gaining the experience. So we would continue to provide support in terms of promoting convergence, promoting harmonization, helping develop the technical guidelines, but also looking at building the capacity in countries and within regions so that the regulators, and if we're looking at as well clinical trial authorization, you have to bring in the ethics committee in this particular instance, building the capacity and making sure the links are there, and that the processes, in fact, are more streamlined. So reliance, joint work sharing, joint assessment, inspections, etc. And we would, if anything, expect that this would accelerate with the implementation of the AMA. So really our role remains the same. And I would say that there's an opportunity here with the continental working groups to leapfrog even over, rec by rec, and to ensure consistency. And if you look at the job that's to be done, it is difficult, as you look across Africa, but going from 55 to 8 to 1, where it makes sense, and also address issues that really go across regions, such as substandard and falsified medicines, which is one of the key triggers, and I think driving forces behind the AMA as well. So our job stays the same, but we look to do that increasingly with other partners.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for that. Very helpful, the role that WHO is playing in supporting this vision. So perhaps now with that very solid context provided, let me change gears a little bit here. And this I'll open to any of the panelists, and perhaps I'm looking at John there and Petra, in terms of having listened to this context and been part of this process for the last few years. What do you think will be some of the challenges that this process might face from your vantage point? This AMA process of setting up AMA, but also once it's set up.
I think listening to what Gugu and Margaret just explained, one of the challenges certainly is a certain level of complexity. I think there's the complexity of the African continent going from national to regional to continental. And then the complexity of also embedding this continental exercise into a global network. So I think this will be a challenge for the AMA to resolve. Looking at current tasks that maybe will be kind of delegated to the regional networks and then to AMA. So this should create efficiency. It should not duplicate efforts that are taking place at the regions and the countries. So that, I think, is one part of the challenges. Looking at the treaty as it is now, I think it's also complexity of the tasks of AMA that have now been allocated. If you look at the whole list, you have operational tasks, like regulatory functions that AMA should take over. And then you have also a lot of support functions that AMA would have. And organizationally, how you would resolve this, I think, would also be a challenge. So this would be just two that I would like to mention here.
Thank you, Petra. I think one of the other things that we see could be a challenge, but it could also be an opportunity, is what I would refer as a sovereignty concerns, that every country would still have to go back home and do certain things according to the rules in that country. So as far as we set up, a very good scientific-based decision-making process at AMA level, when you come back to the country and you have to, of course, deal with the nitty-gritties in the country, then we could potentially see some administrative hurdles, which I think it's something we need to anticipate well ahead of time, because this is one of the potential areas where we could face quite some roadblocks in terms of enhancing access to the products in the countries. The other thing, of course, is in the ideal sense, this should take a holistic approach, meaning to look at these products and agents from an end-to-end kind of handling, not just introducing them into the market. And then that begs the question of available capacity. Of course, like Gugu mentioned, we actually have the capacity in the continent. So the challenge is to make sure that it's mapped out in a way that we fully appropriate the value that we currently have in the continent. And yeah, of course, it's an opportunity to bring everyone together. But certainly it could be a challenge, especially at the starting point.
Thanks. And maybe let me just build on from there, John. From you as an industry representative and the co-chair of the Africa Regulatory Network, what would a successful AMA look like for you as a stakeholder? And what do you think would be having mentioned some of these challenges, what would be critical success factors?
I think one of them could be AMA that moves a little bit further away from the administrative elements and closer to the scientific kind of best way of making decisions, because then in the end it doesn't matter where the decision is made from if you're having this as a platform. So if we minimize the administrative elements, of course there are some we appreciate will never be eliminated, but there is also a good number of them where partners and stakeholders could work together, industry included, to somehow deal with them. I think that's one measure that we see would be. The other one is also to introduce some element of predictability, that you go through this process and this is a potential outcome, because then that factors into the planning when you're getting and introducing the products into the market through this channel. So the element of predictability, which is somehow tied to the transparency, the timelines and everything, I think that would also be a measure of a successful AMA. I don't think AMA will be successful if there is no uptick. And that's also for us in the industry, that we have to engage from the word go, step by step, and when and the right time in terms of also going through the processes that AMA will put in place, because without that then you're not able to test and see whether what is being put in place is working. So seeing those results also, I think, would also be something that would give a picture of how well it's working or not working. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Any other thoughts on the success factors and what success would look like for AMA? Any other thoughts beyond what John has mentioned? I think very, very good points there.
I think, and I can just add on to it, there is also the element of really taking advantage of what is currently existing. Google mentioned we have this capacity. So I think AMA that has also that platform that there could be sharing of information and work would be something that you could see it's a success, because there is no need. I think Mike mentioned about AVAREF and what is happening as far as evaluating clinical trials. So if we continue to solidify that and work with the capacity that we have and build on one rather than many, I think that would also be a good measure.
Mike?
Yeah, and I fully agree. And a couple of points that John's mentioned that I'd like to pick up on. The issue of sovereignty, of course, it always comes up, you know. But I think what is going to be critical is that scientific opinions made at a continental level have to be translated into market authorizations at a national level. That has to happen. This is a voluntary arrangement, as I understand. So there has to be a commitment, I think, that if you're feeding into this and you're supporting it, particularly in areas, let's say new product introduction, that those decisions that are being made at a continental level have to translate into timely authorization at a national level. And I think implementation, anybody that's been involved in harmonization activities, be they international or regional, knows that where things can tend to fall down is in the implementation side of things. So I think it's going to have to translate into concrete actions. We're going to have to see less inspections, and in fact that people are relying on one another more. So if there are inspections associated with, and there will be, with the remit of AMA, then that's got to lead to, I think, more efficiencies in terms of the overall system. The end-to-end is, I think, is very important, because, again, if we're looking at new products, very much agree that it doesn't end with the market authorization. Are the risk management plans appropriate for Africa, for the different countries? And what happens after that in terms of safety? That is critically important, and maybe even more important than the original market authorization. How are variations going to be handled? And you know, so I think all of these things, the devil is in the details, and that would argue also for taking a pragmatic, stepwise approach, because we're talking about medical devices, we're talking about vaccines, we're talking about biotherapeutics, biosimilars, etc. So I think we need to start stepwise, but also with a view end-to-end.
Maybe just to add on to that.
Very briefly, Margaret.
Yeah,
please.
briefly, because the issue around uptake of the scientific opinion coming from AMA at the national level, I think we have some lessons to learn from the existing initiative. Like, for example, the East African community, the Zibona approach, where they do joint work, they come up with an opinion, and then member states will have to use that as a basis for national decision-making process. So I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the existing initiative. Secondly, when it comes to issues around accountability, information sharing, efficiency, we already have put in place under the Emirates initiative such systems to ensure that at least on the part of industry, it's easier for them to be able to get the applications, reviewed, and of course the communication between the regulator and the industry, and also amongst the regulators themselves. So I think it's just a matter of taking on what is already working currently and be able to replicate in the AMA model.
No, thank you very much, Margaret, for that. So just one more before I turn this to the floor and give you an opportunity to ask questions as well. Petra, from where you sit and having been involved working with WHO to support the African region, but also your agency sitting here in Europe very close to the EMA, what do you see do you see any similarities in the process, but also the model that Google described in terms of how they envision AMA working?
I think there are definitely similarities and differences between EMA and AMA. I think the similarities are in the kind of multinational nature. The European Union has 28 member states currently still, plus 3 EEA countries. The African continent is slightly bigger, but I think the multinationality, the multilinguality is a similar situation. The diversity amongst members is also a similarity, I think, rather than a difference, because in the European EEA context, you have a country called Liechtenstein, which I think has 30,000 inhabitants. And you have countries like Germany, France, etc., which are some of the bigger countries in the world. Differences I saw when I looked at the missions, the mandates. I think there are some similarities looking at the core, like regulatory functions, also guideline development. But as I also mentioned, AMA has some additional elements of its mandate coming from the Emirates, the technical guidance, the coordination activities in these areas. So these go a bit beyond what is in EMA's mandate is. So I can see that AMA has been doing, or the Emirates initiative has been doing a benchmark exercise with EMA. But I think also it needs to be considered what can be used as a benchmark and maybe where AMA will have to go a different way.
Right. Gugu, does she reflect your thoughts?
Yes, yes, she does. Yes, she does. But the fundamental difference between AMA and EMA is that EMA is based on a legal basis. Now, none of the treaties on the African continent by the African Union have a legal basis per se. So you can't, at EMA, you make a decision, the countries have to adopt that decision. AMA, it will be say advice, and countries, I think it has been said before, will exercise their sovereign right to adopt that or not. I mean, it is not enforceable. So that's the fundamental difference between, I think, the two systems. So we'll have to do a lot of advocacy, and I think the success of the work-sharing arrangements at the regional economic community level should demonstrate that even at continental level we can do the same thing, and they can adopt, these decisions can be adopted by national agencies.
Thank you very much for that. And at this point, let me open up the floor for questions to our panelists. You have the floor. You want to use the mic here?
Thank you very much, the panelists. The reason why I am here today with my chair-elect Andrew Spiegel is firstly to thank Margaret for having been such an inspiration and driving this force. She has helped us at the International Alliance of Patient Organizations left, right, and center. She gave us information every time she appeared at our congresses. She helped us at the Entebbe conferences as well. And for that, we must thank you, that you've done great. The second reason I'm here at a personal level as a patient, I was 8 years old and I heard Kwame Nkrumah speak in Nairobi. And I was mesmerized. He talked about a Pan-Africanism driven by Pan-African organizations developed to international standards. Now, what Margaret has delivered is that dream, delivered an international standards organizations for Africa. AMA is the vision. Let us not forget that. And as patients in Africa, my members, we are absolutely committed to this, and we want to drive this forward. Because without this, we do not have a guarantee of safe, quality, and innovative drugs delivered quickly to us. That's my vision, and I thank the panel for having brought this up, and everybody who has come here on a Sunday like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comment. Any questions? The floor is open. Any comments? This one over there.
Is it okay? Thank you very much.
Your name,
yes,
please. And
Ursula Busse, I work for Novartis, but I'm here to learn. Thank you very much for this very insightful discussion. My question is actually to the original goal for the African regulatory harmonization to provide access to safe and effective medicines to patients. So this has been going on for a couple of years, a decade maybe now. Do you already see that patients have increased access to safer and higher quality medicines?
we can take another question and then we get the responses.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Bisola Ashuru. I'm with Novartis. My question is regarding Avaref. It was already mentioned during the presentation, but Avaref has been a good example of harmonization. I also know they've expanded their scope to include drugs. So I'll be curious to hear what has been the progress or any experience from that expansion of scope. Thank you.
Okay, do we want to take those two questions? So the first one around the goal around improving access through Emirates, patient access to safe, efficacious, quality medicines, and then the Avaref question.
Yeah, thank you. I think when it comes to improving access, if you look at the goal, we're talking about contributing to. We are not attributing directly to access, but rather contributing to the process of facilitating access to medicines. That we've been able to achieve. We've seen the work that has been done in East African community, where the timelines for approval of products has been reduced from more than 24 months to less than 12 months. At some point, we had even 6 months approval timelines. So this is contributing to that, and we see that as really a success. Equally, we see the work that has been done in the Southern African region. Through the collaborative procedure, countries have been able to quickly approve products, and it's gone down less to, I think it was an average of 8 months now, from more than 24 months. So this is the contribution that we see as really something that you can record as success.
Thank you. Any additions to that?
Just to address the question on Avaref, yes, that scope was expanded in 2016. And since then, we have had medicines that have actually gone through joint review. And this is a very important instrument. So we have product development partnerships that have actually requested and been the beneficiary of joint reviews for clinical trials that in fact span RECs, because as sponsors, you're not going for one REC, but you're going for various countries. And so that has actually taken off. If we look at vaccines too and companion diagnostics, the expansion in scope makes sense. What we're in the process of doing, and that's after a tabletop exercise in Accra last November that was in part sponsored by CEPI, is to actually refine that and to make that process, I think, more efficient, including looking at product development pipelines and having engagement with Avaref throughout the product development pipeline so that the candidates that, be it a vaccine, be it a diagnostic, be it a medicine, that are appropriate, that trigger a joint review, that in fact can happen business as usual, not just in the case of emergencies where it started with Ebola in West Africa, but actually be the norm.
Thank you very much, Mike. I will allow perhaps just one more question or comment.
First, a comment and a compliment to the energy you're deploying to get the EMA on its way, and I think it's worth mentioning and saluting. Based on our experience, I think of having, sorry, I should have said Agnès Saint-Raymond, European Medicines Agency. So we have some experience of working as a collaborative group of nations. I think maybe certainly not having a legal framework will be a relative risk. So working already on reliance through joint assessment and showing to people that they actually get a better result, they look better if they work with the other is quite important. In our experience, the law is there to frame it, but it's people working together which makes really the difference. It's not just the law. So it helps when you have a divergence of view. And also, if I may, I think one of the lessons we've learned and has been reinforced by Brexit is that you need to encourage every single nation to participate. Don't leave behind people. I know there are differences between your communities, French-speaking, Portuguese-speaking, and the English-speaking. They are not at the same level. They are not so necessarily used to work together. I think it's quite important, even though they will not work at the same pace and they will not have the same, because they don't have the same history and the same approach to joint work. It's very important to get them on board as well and not leave anybody behind, because that will jeopardize the reliance, the overall system, and at the same time it will make a two-speed Africa, which is not what you want. So it's very important to take the time to convince the one that are maybe less engaged to join the train and to work together. And I think our recent experience of joint assessment has been a success because it's exactly demonstrating that. We were happy to work with both the SADC community and the ECOWAS community in this exercise. And once Brexit is over, we will continue, and we intend to continue supporting this kind of exercise.
Thank you very much, Agnès, for those comments. And we're coming just about the hour. I think we've had some very lively discussions, you'll agree with me, on this subject. And we've had, that AMA is building onto the work that is already ongoing in the region with the regional initiatives, and that the national regulatory authorities will be very much a part of this. They'll contribute the expertise. In fact, at the end of the day, they will take the recommendations for the case of marketing authorization back into their countries and issue the marketing authorizations. We've had quite a bit around the model of AMA, a lean secretariat and technical working groups supporting that. We had quite a bit about the milestones once the treaty once AMA is approved by the heads of state. It will take 2 to 3 years, it's projected, for the minimum of 15 countries to sign on the treaty, and then for AMA to be established. WHO will continue to play this important role of providing technical support. We had quite a bit around the challenges, but also what the success factors will be. The predictability of the process, decisions translating into national authorizations or approvals, the concept of reliance and so on, but also a pragmatic and a stepwise process so that the AMA doesn't chew too much. And then the differences between the EMA and AMA, the EMA having, really a binding legal process, while AMA will depend on, at the continental level, you have a recommendation, and then the countries really have to take that and make a national decision. But we also had that patient organizations see this as a vision that will advance access to quality, safe and effective medicines in Africa. And we had the advice from colleagues at the EMA saying, it would be important not to leave any country behind, because that will jeopardize the process of reliance, but also create a continent in which countries at different levels two-speed Africa, as Agnes describes it. So please, ladies and gentlemen, join me to thank this wonderful panel.